my doctor, and he said, are you having contractions? And I told him about, you know, basically what was happening in terms of just me feeling like I had to have a bowel movement. He goes, okay, well, he was like, next time you feel that way, start timing. So I did. Come to find out that that was the beginning of my contraction. So every time I felt like I had to go was a contraction. And I was expecting it to be like I said on TV, where you're just like, oh my God, and you're holding on and you know, you're breathing through and everything, and it wasn't it. It was that were those things that I was experiencing at the time were the contractions. So I started timing. And they were about, at that point, maybe 15 minutes apart, and it wasn't too big, you know, and they always tell you, you know, if you can, if you don't have any particular medical conditions where you would need to go to the hospital right away, is to wait it out at home as long as you possibly can. And of course, always listen to your doctor about when they say you should probably come in. But my doctor told me when they were about 5 minutes apart to come to probably, you know, start heading toward the hospital. So once they hit about 5 minutes apart is when I went in. That was about 7 o'clock. Oh boy, on the 16th of November. And went in, and I hadn't dilated any at all, actually. I was still at 0, but I was 100% effaced. So my cervix had totally cleared out of the way. It was thin, it was 100%, but I was still at 0 when it came to dilation. So they sent me home. So I was at home, and same contractions. Wasn't getting any worse in terms of pain, but I felt like, oh my goodness, this is just, I'm in it for the long haul. So I think what happened was I felt like it started to get, the pain did at one point start to get worse. The point that it started to get worse, I went in back to the hospital on the 17th at around 7 o'clock that evening. They're like, you are about 2 centimeters dilated, 100% effaced, so we are going to keep you. I didn't deliver Jeremiah until 3 o'clock p.m. on the 18th. And so that means I was well over 38 hours in labor with him. Now, with that being said, it sounds like really like, oh my God, what did you do for pain? That's ridiculous. 38 hours of you know, progressively worse contractions, and actually it wasn't. It didn't really start getting to the point where I was like, you know, couldn't breathe, couldn't talk, wouldn't smile kind of thing, until I was, I don't know, maybe probably around, I'll say 10 o'clock on the 18th. And so, and that's when it started to get to the point where it was like, okay, maybe I should consider pain medication, which at that point I hadn't. I wanted to do it completely free of any pain meds. So by that time my family was there, everybody had showed up. And one thing I think people don't tell you is that sometimes it's hard to figure out what muscles to use in order to push. So I was one of those people who didn't know which muscles I needed in order to push. So when I was at 10 centimeters dilated, I'm gonna back up a little bit before I go into the actual pushing, because I'd like to say that I did not have any pain medication outside of, I was given Nubane for a pain relief. And the way Nubane treated me, and I'm quite sure it's going to treat everyone differently, but the way it did me was really quite weird. I actually didn't necessarily care about the pain anymore. The pain was still there. It was still intense, but I was just like, whatever, I don't care. And so that was just a really interesting feeling. I don't know, drugs are interesting. So I had that, and the way it works is that the first dosage works better the first time than it does any subsequent times. So the next time they give it to you, you don't necessarily feel the effects anymore, and it's just like, what was the point of even having it? In my case anyway. So, I was on that for a while, but I was really, really holding off on the epidural. I was like, nope, I don't want it. And then it got to the point where it was like unbearable. And at that point, I was like, knock me out. I don't care what you do. This is ridiculous. And my aunt was there, and my aunt, if you know her, you would understand her and what she did. She basically just said, you know what, I think she can handle it. Now, this is the person supposed to be on my side, told the nurses and anyone else involved just to see what she does. Now, I wasn't necessarily asking for the epidural at that point, but I was definitely considering it. And so I didn't say anything about the epidural, but she definitely had a hand in me not actually having the epidural. The Nubane, actually, what it does also is that it kind of knocks you out in between contractions. So I slept, and when the contraction hit, I woke up, I breathed through it, and then I went right back to sleep, and that's how exhausted I was. And they don't call it labor for nothing. So anyway, I was definitely working hard. 10 centimeters hit. They come in, they break down the beds, and put up the stirrups, and you're, apparently ready to push. And I'm sitting here and I'm waiting. At that point, in my case, I was so excited that it was finally time to meet my child that a lot of the pain at that point had kind of went away. Maybe adrenaline kind of kicked in at that moment, and I know that's kind of like a natural pain reliever, so maybe that's what happened, not quite sure. But when they said it's time for you to push, in my mind, I don't know, it just sort of kind of, the pain alleviated in a way that was, that allowed me to sort of kind of refocus myself and going into another level of what did I needed to do next, which was push. So they told me with the next contraction, start pushing. So I did just that. And if you've been reading anywhere on the internet or in books or anywhere, they tell you that when you push, the baby comes down a little bit in the canal, and then when you stop pushing, it goes back up. And then each time it goes out a little bit more, but comes back a little. I was just like, okay. I had pushed for 45 minutes straight, and nothing was happening. And the doctors didn't call it and say, okay, she needs to have a C-section at this point. And I think the reason that came along with that had to do with the fact that the baby was tolerating the contractions and the pushing. I was tolerating it. There was, I actually had a wide enough birth canal where the baby would eventually come out. The thing is that I was just tired. And being my first child, didn't know which muscles to use in order to push effectively. So, the doctor looks at me and says, we're going to use a vacuum. And I looked at him at that moment and I said, a what? Because I never heard of such a thing. I've heard of forceps, and I understood what those did, but I also knew I didn't want that to happen. And I probably, if he would have said forceps, I probably would have said, I would rather have a C-section to use forceps on my child, because I didn't want anyone to injure my child. And that was just a personal choice, and I know reading about that, but I never heard of a vacuum. So out comes this instrument, and he shows it to me, and I'm like, I'm gonna pause for a moment, just for a minute, just to get him. I didn't know what I was looking at. It was an interesting piece of equipment. It had a suction cup on the end, and on the other end there was a like a little metal box with knobs on it. I'm assuming that adjusted the vacuum. And so that's what they did. They attached the vacuum to the top of my son's head, turned it on a little bit, and with the next contraction, he told me to push as much as I possibly could, and out came my baby. And I was like, wow, where was that 45 minutes ago? I was completely in awe of the machine, and I felt a little bit safer with the vacuum as opposed to the forceps. Personal preference. I had issues with the forceps. So anyway, but he never even, suggested those, so I didn't have to sit there and argue with him about how he wasn't going to do that. So anyway, and I just remember Jeremiah was born, and he came out, and his eyes were wide open. He was looking around, and actually kind of freaked my husband out a bit, because you just don't just think that your child is going to come out with his eyes wide open, and he's looking around, and he was in shock, it appeared, and no crying at all, none. Matter of fact, they had to thump his feet to get him to cry a bit, and it was just the most amazing experience of my life. I had, good grief, maybe 7 or 8 people in my room at that moment, and it was really interesting because I didn't even care when it came to my modesty. It was like, whatever, baby's coming out and you seeing all my goods, and that's okay because I'm in pain. And then after a while it was like, oh wait, modesty. So then that happened. But anyway, I did tear just a little bit, and just to backtrack, I did have an episiotomy. And what they do there is because my son's head is so big, and I love you, Jeremiah, but your head is huge. Anyway, they did sort of numb me up in my nether regions, and they snipped, and then of course the whole vacuum thing, and the baby came out. So he sewed me up, took the baby off, and everything else that happens when you have a child happened. So they cleaned him up a bit, laid him on my chest. Everybody oohed and awed, and as people do. And that's my birth story for Jer. Afterwards, I was in the hospital maybe 2 days, and enjoyed every minute of being able to sleep when I wanted to. and then, going home afterwards, that was amazing. Funny story about me going home though. So on my way out of the hospital policy, you have to be wheeled out, and of course your car seat has to be properly installed and everything. And there was a young lady there who was one of the transport people, and she was just really giddy over the baby, which was, fine by me. Of course, it was my child, and I was really excited. And you could tell that she was, super excited when she got to transport the new mothers down to their cars. And I saw her smiling at Jeremiah, and she actually had her teeth filed down her canines to make them look like vampire teeth. And I remember thinking to myself, if you do not get away from my baby in a matter of moments, I'm gonna go kung fu on you. So anyway, but I thought that was just funny. Actually, looking back on it, it was a personal preference for her, and that's fine. And she was probably a lovely young lady. I just know it's just really interesting when you do have your child and everything that it was just really interesting how I went into this mode of protect and, just right away. So anyway, there's that. Going home with him, no problems. Taking care of him afterwards, no problems. Hormone adjustment, yes, that's a thing. Baby blues, not really. Postpartum depression, not really. But I was a little weepy for a minute. Previous to me giving birth to him, the spring of the year that I gave birth to him, so maybe, I don't know, about 6 months before I was about 3 months pregnant, one of the elders in my church passed away. And if you knew this elder, you would just know that he was just one of the most biggest teddy bears that you could ever know. And he was just a loving man. And I just always wished that he had the opportunity to meet my son. And so when my son came home with me and we were just sitting around, and it was a song that came on the radio or that my husband was playing, and it just made me think of him, and I remember just being like a ball of tears. But outside of that, no, I just count that as just regular emotion that, you know, a mother experiences after giving birth. So that is my tale of Jeremiah coming into this world. He, again, is now 18 years old. He's off to college in New York City, and he is just as interesting of a guy as he was when he was born. So yeah, that's it. Thanks for listening.